air disaster in aviation history, it almost doubles any previous death toll.
On March 3, 1974, 346 people boarded a plane in Paris. They were heading to London, a short flight, barely an hour. Some of them were not even supposed to be on this aircraft. They were stranded passengers who grabbed the last available seats because their original airline had gone on strike. 9 minutes after takeoff, the rear cargo door exploded off the fuselage at 11,000 feet. The cabin floor collapsed. 6 passengers, still strapped to their seats, were sucked out of the aircraft and fell nearly 2 miles to the ground. The flight control cables were severed. The pilots lost the ability to steer, to climb, to do anything at all. 77 seconds later, the plane hit a forest at 783 kilometers per hour. There were no survivors. Rescue teams found 20,000 body fragments. Only 40 of the 346 people could be visually identified. This was the deadliest single aircraft disaster in aviation history at the time, and it should never have happened, because every single person responsible for the safety of this aircraft already knew that this exact failure was going to kill people. They knew it. They wrote it down, and then they chose to do nothing. 2 years before this crash, the exact same door on the exact same aircraft type blew off in the exact same way. That time, the pilots landed safely. Everyone survived. Engineers found the flaw. They wrote memos. They begged their superiors to fix it. So why were 346 people allowed to board a plane with a known, documented, lethal design flaw that had already nearly killed 67 people 2 years earlier? The answer is one of the most disturbing stories in aviation history: corporate greed, regulatory failure, a buried memo that predicted this exact disaster, a baggage handler blamed for the deaths of hundreds even though he did everything he was told, and a cargo door designed so badly that even the engineers who built it said it would eventually bring down an airplane. And here is what will stay with you. If the people in charge had spent a fraction of what they later paid in lawsuits to simply fix the door, every one of those 346 people would have gone home to their families that night. So why did they not fix it? Stay with me. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a cargo door killed 346 people. In the late 1960s, Boeing had launched the 747 and was dominating the market. 2 rivals saw an opportunity to build a smaller wide-body jet. Lockheed was building the L1011 TriStar. McDonnell Douglas was building the DC-10. The market could only support one of them. The loser would take losses severe enough to destroy the company. That pressure to win, to get the DC-10 to market first, would end up costing 346 lives. The DC-10 was a wide-body trijet, 2 engines under the wings, a third in the tail, fast, comfortable, capable. But it had a design flaw hidden in its belly that its creators knew about from the very beginning. The flaw was in the cargo doors. On most aircraft, the passenger doors open inward. They are plug doors. Air pressure at altitude holds them shut. It is physically impossible for them to blow open. But the DC-10's cargo doors opened outward. McDonnell Douglas made this choice to maximize cargo space. More revenue, more orders. A business decision. An outward opening door at altitude fights against pressurization, trying to blow it open. To keep it shut, McDonnell Douglas designed an elaborate latching system with C-shaped hooks, locking pins, and an external handle. On paper, it worked. In reality, the linkage between the handle and the pins was too weak. A handler could force the handle closed even when the latches were not engaged. When this happened, every cockpit indicator showed the door as locked, but it was not. And here is what made this truly lethal. The flight control cables for the DC-10's elevators and rudder ran directly under the cabin floor. If the cargo door blew off, the decompression would collapse the floor. The cables would be severed. The pilots would lose all ability to control the tail of the aircraft. Elevators, rudder, rear engine, everything gone in an instant. McDonnell Douglas knew about this in 1969. The door actually blew off during a ground pressure test in 1970. The floor collapsed exactly as predicted. They chose not to redesign it. Redesigning would mean grounding every DC-10 already built. It would mean delays and cost. In a race against Lockheed, that was unacceptable. So they shipped the airplane with a door that could appear locked when it was not, a floor that would collapse if the door failed, while in-flight controls routed through the most vulnerable part of the aircraft.
Three major manufacturers of jetliners, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, and Lockheed, to see who could get the first jumbo out.
On June 12, 1972, American Airlines Flight 96, a DC-10 carrying 56 passengers and 11 crew, departed Detroit. 5 minutes after takeoff, at 11,750 feet, the rear left cargo door blew off above Windsor, Ontario. The floor partially collapsed. A casket was sucked out of the cargo hold. 2 flight attendants felt the floor give way beneath their feet. The rudder jammed to full right. The tail engine died. Control cables were damaged. This plane should have crashed. But Captain Bryce McCormick, a 52-year-old veteran with 24,000 flight hours, had practiced a specific scenario in the DC-10 simulator just weeks earlier. Flying the plane using only the throttles, differential thrust, push the left engine forward to turn right, push the right engine to turn left, control altitude by controlling speed. It was a technique designed for a worst-case hydraulic failure. No one ever imagined it would be needed because of a cargo door. McCormick used this technique to nurse the crippled DC-10 back toward Detroit. His first officer, Peter Whitney, applied full reverse thrust on the left engine and idled the right to straighten their path on final approach. The plane came in fast and hard, touching down and rolling to a stop 880 feet from the end of the runway, with the right landing gear off the pavement and sinking into the grass beside it. Every single person on board survived.
The plane landed, it seemed like we just went on forever. I mean, it was just forever.
When the crew got out and walked around to the rear of the aircraft, they saw what had happened. The entire aft cargo door was gone. In its place was a jagged hole. The metal peeled upward like it had been opened by a giant can opener. Above the hole, the cabin floor sagged visibly. It was immediately obvious that this was not a maintenance error or a freak occurrence. This was a fundamental design failure. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated immediately. They found exactly what was wrong. The latching system was flawed. The warning systems, both the cockpit light and the vent door, were connected to the locking handle, not the latches themselves. So when the handle was forced closed, both indicators showed secure, even though the latches had not engaged. They recommended mandatory modifications. Reinforce the locking mechanism to make it physically impossible to close the handle with unengaged latches. Add pressure relief vents to the cabin floor so that even if a door failed, the pressure would equalize without collapsing the floor. The NTSB sent these recommendations to the Federal Aviation Administration. The FAA was supposed to issue a mandatory airworthiness directive, an order that would ground every DC-10 until the fix was implemented. Instead, the head of the FAA reached what was later described as a gentleman's agreement with McDonnell Douglas. Rather than mandate immediate repairs, they agreed to implement changes through voluntary service bulletins, minor modifications, a stronger linkage plate, a small peephole window so handlers could visually check pin position. All false a warning placard explaining how to verify the latches. The floor was never reinforced. The pressure relief vents were never installed. The fundamental flaw remained exactly as it was, a band-aid on a bullet wound, and everyone involved knew it. Two weeks after Flight 96, a man named Dan Applegate sat down and wrote the most infamous memo in engineering history. Applegate was director of product engineering at Convair, the General Dynamics division that built the DC-10's fuselage and doors. He understood every rivet in that cargo door system, and he was terrified. His memo to Supervisor J.B. Hurt was blunt, almost desperate. Unlike most engineering communications, which hide behind phrases like the data would appear to indicate or testing has provided reason to believe, Applegate spoke plainly. The DC-10 demonstrated an inherent susceptibility to catastrophic failure. The door had blown off in a ground test in 1970. The control cables running through the unvented floor would be destroyed if the door ever failed in flight. He called the service bulletins that McDonnell Douglas had issued after Flight 96 Band-Aid fixes. He argued that even if those fixes were foolproof, which he believed they were not, the unvented floor left the aircraft vulnerable to any decompression event. A cargo door, a bomb, a mid-air collision, structural fatigue, anything that breached the cargo hold would collapse the floor and destroy the controls. Then Applegate wrote the words that would haunt aviation for decades. He said it seemed inevitable that in the 20-plus years ahead, cargo doors would come open, and he expected this would usually result in the loss of the aircraft. Not might, not could, usually. He was not guessing. He was not speculating. He was an engineer who understood every component in that system, and he was telling his company that people were going to die. Hurt read the memo, acknowledged the risk was real, acknowledged Convair could be held liable, and rejected the recommendation. The reason was purely financial. Convair's contract contained a reliance clause. If they raised design concerns now, after production had begun, they could be stuck paying for expensive retrofits to every DC-10 in existence. Hurt called this an interesting legal and moral problem. He chose the legal over the moral. The memo was filed away. No one contacted McDonnell Douglas. No one contacted the FAA. No one told the airlines or the passengers. But for 20 months, DC-10s flew with a flaw that an engineer had predicted in writing would kill people. March 3rd, 1974, Paris. Orly Airport was in chaos. British European Airways employees had gone on strike. Hundreds of London-bound passengers were stranded across Europe. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 arrived from Istanbul at 11 in the morning. 50 passengers got off. That should have left the London leg quiet, but when officials realized the DC-10 had hundreds of empty seats, they began selling them to stranded BEA passengers. 216 people piled on board. The plane was now carrying 335 passengers and 11 crew. Among them were John Cooper, a British Olympic silver medalist from the 1964 Tokyo Games, Jim Conway, General Secretary of the British Amalgamated Engineering Union, members of an amateur rugby team from Bury St. Edmunds, returning from a Five Nations match, Japanese tourists, Turkish businessmen, French families, Americans on holiday. While passengers boarded, Mohammed Mahmoudi, an Algerian-born baggage handler, was closing the rear cargo door. He pressed the button, heard the latches engage, pushed the handle into the stowed position. It moved smoothly. The vent door closed. The cockpit warning light went out. Everything appeared normal, but the locking pins had not engaged, and Mahmoudi could not have known. The peephole window existed, but he was never trained to use it. The warning placard was in English and Turkish. He spoke neither. He was fluent in 3 other languages. He had been told one rule. If the handle stows and the vent closes, the door is safe. The critical support plate from the service bulletin had never been installed, despite logs showing it was completed. Someone had filed down the locking pins, reducing their travel so the handle closed without resistance. Mahmoudi himself later said no unusual force was needed. The ground engineer was away at training. The flight engineer never checked the door. Every safety barrier had failed. At 12:32, Flight 981 took off. 346 people on board, not one knowing their aircraft was already doomed. The DC-10 climbed eastward from Paris, banking north before turning west toward London. Autopilot engaged, clear weather, everything routine. 9 minutes after takeoff, passing over Meaux at 11,000 feet, the actuator bolts sheared. The door swung open, then it tore completely off. The cargo hold decompressed explosively. 36 kilopascals of pressure difference acted on the floor, like a giant fist from below. A large section of cabin floor buckled, broke free, and was ejected through the hole. 6 Japanese passengers still in their seats were torn from the aircraft with that floor section. They fell nearly 2 miles. Their bodies were found in a turnip field near St. Pathis, 15 kilometers from where the plane hit the ground. Inside the cabin, a massive hole gaped in the floor. Wind screamed through the fuselage. Debris flew. The decompression fog filled the air. But the true catastrophe was beneath the floor. Every control cable for the elevators, rudder, and tail engine was severed or jammed. The pilots lost everything. But the first officer said the fuselage has burst. The overspeed warning blared. The nose dropped 20 degrees. The DC-10 began accelerating in an uncontrollable dive. Captain Berkoas and First Officer Ulisman fought with everything they had. But unlike McCormick on Flight 96, who had partial control, Berkoas had nothing. The full cabin load meant the floor collapsed far more catastrophically. When it failed, it took every cable with it. Air traffic control heard a transmission in Turkish. Heavy background noise, warnings. Then the radar return split in two. Then the transponder signal vanished. "77 seconds after the door blew off, Turkish Airlines Flight 981 struck the Ermenonville forest at 783 kilometers per hour. The aircraft did not crash, it disintegrated. Thousands of pieces across a debris field over 2,000 feet long. Trees stripped bare, draped with wreckage. 20,000 body fragments recovered. Only 40 victims identifiable by sight. The deadliest aviation disaster in history at that time." The French investigation quickly identified the mechanism. The cargo door was not properly latched. It blew off, the floor collapsed. Controls destroyed, aircraft lost. Assigning blame was where things got ugly. McDonnell Douglas, facing the largest civil lawsuit in aviation history, pointed fingers everywhere. They blamed the FAA for not issuing a mandatory directive, Turkish Airlines for letting the pins be filed down, General Dynamics for the door design, even though Convair had built the door exactly to McDonnell Douglas's specifications. And most despicably, they blamed Mohammed Mahmoudi. Their lawyers called him an illiterate baggage handler who failed to close the door properly. The French media called for his arrest. He became a scapegoat so the big players could avoid accountability. The investigators saw through it. They stated publicly that it was unrealistic to expect an untrained, low-paid baggage handler who could not read the warning in the languages provided to be responsible for the safety of an aircraft. Mahmoudi had done exactly what he was trained to do. The system lied to him. Mahmoudi pushed back. He was not illiterate. He spoke 3 languages, just not the 2 on the warning placard. Then the Applegate memo surfaced during discovery. The memo that predicted everything. The memo that said aircraft would be lost. The memo that was rejected because fixing the problem cost too much. It proved both Convair and McDonnell Douglas knew the design could kill. It proved 346 deaths resulted from a calculated business decision. McDonnell Douglas settled for approximately $100 million. Their share was $80 million, with $18 million from Lloyd's of London. Adjusted for inflation, roughly $600 million today. Split among 346 families. That was the price they put on 346 lives. Dan Applegate never spoke publicly. He cooperated with lawyers and retreated into silence. His memo became a landmark case in engineering ethics, taught worldwide as an example of what happens when profit is prioritized over safety. He lived knowing he had been right, knowing he had warned them, knowing that if anyone had listened, 346 people would still be alive. After the crash, the Band-Aid era was over. The FAA issued Airworthiness Directive 74-08-04 just 96 hours after impact, sent by telegraph to every DC-10 operator worldwide. It mandated a complete redesign of the cargo door latching system, not a modification, a complete redesign. The new system made it physically impossible for the handle to close unless the latches were fully engaged. Then came the Floors and Doors Directive. Pressure relief vents were cut into the floors of all wide-body aircraft. DC-10s, L1011s, 747s, A300s. If a cargo door or any fuselage section ever failed again, the floor would not collapse. The pressure would equalize. The controls would survive. Later, regulators required that airliners sustain the loss of a 20 square foot hull section and remain controllable. No single failure should render an aircraft unflyable. No DC-10 or MD-11 ever suffered a cargo door failure again. The gentleman's agreement between the FAA and McDonnell Douglas became a cautionary tale. It proved that when companies are given the choice between fixing a known flaw and hoping it will not kill, they choose hope. And hope is not a safety strategy. The Applegate memo is studied in universities worldwide. It raises questions with no comfortable answers. Should Applegate have gone public? Should he have contacted the FAA directly? He followed his chain of command. He made his case, his superiors rejected it. He accepted their decision. 346 people died. Mohammed Mahmoudi was exonerated. The investigation made clear he bore no responsibility. He followed his training. The system was designed so failure was invisible. The door said closed. The cockpit said closed. Everyone believed it. It was not. The memorial in the Ermenonville forest stands to this day. A stone monument with 346 names engraved in granite. French, Turkish, Japanese, British, American. People who boarded a plane on a Sunday afternoon and never arrived. People who died because a cargo door was designed badly, because a fix was never installed, because a memo was ignored, because a regulator shook hands instead of issuing an order, because a handler could not read a warning in a language he did not speak. 346 people killed by a cargo door, not by fate, not by weather, not by pilot error, by a door that everyone knew was going to fail. That is the story of Turkish Airlines Flight 981, and it must never be forgotten.